I see participants coming in. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this Vibe series of B-Link Innovation, where we're going to talk about innovation changing the future of agriculture. So what we'll do is we'll have people coming in and everybody taking a seat, and then we'll start the presentations. Good afternoon, good evening, or afternoon, and for all of you that's looking forward to chocolate, and that the Easter Bunny might have brought just a little while, just a little wait longer. We get some more participants in, and we will start talking about the innovation changing the future of agriculture with our guest speaker, Vic Crone from Callaghan Innovation. So what I'll do, I'll just start the webinar. Welcome everybody to this Vibe event on the Thursday before Easter. We're going to talk about innovation changing the future of agriculture, and we have an absolutely fantastic guest speaker, Vic Crone from Callaghan Innovation. But before I'm going to introduce her, just some housekeeping. This event is brought to you by B-Link Innovation. We are part of Lincoln University. We are a full business unit of Lincoln University, and basically we do three things. We try to connect people, and by events like this. And as you realize, at the moment it is still virtual. We hope that as of next month we will do face-to-face again, so that we can actually have a drink and a nibble and actually start connecting. We think that is important because then we know that after you connect, you perhaps start to collaborate, because you start to talk and you get enthusiastic and you start connecting things. And that's basically when we think the real innovation is actually happening. Because some of our wicked problems we can't solve alone, so we can only do that in a collaborative environment. So that's basically what we're doing here at B-Link Innovation at Lincoln University campus. Some housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed out to all of you. On your screen, if you move your mouse around, you see a Q&A button. If you press the Q&A button, you can actually put in questions, and those questions will be answered by our guest speaker. And you are muted as a participant, but so the only way for you to interact is actually with the Q&A button, and you can actually upvote. If you see questions that other people asked, you can say, "Oh, that is really interesting." You can actually upvote that so that it goes to the top of the list, and then Vic, our guest speaker, will actually see them, and perhaps she will answer them first. Please do get social. So if you like what you've seen, please share it on your social platforms. You'll see us there as well. But now, without further ado, oh, I don't know what I just did. I don't know what I just did. Doesn't matter. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Vic Crone, the CEO from Callaghan Innovation. And I think the real exciting thing is that Vic has so much experience in governance and technology and innovation. But you could argue, well, that's the technical bit and the organizational bit. But what she really brings to Callaghan Innovation, and therefore the innovation ecosystem of New Zealand, is that strong customer focus. And she has a track record of actually building organizational culture. And then you basically have the triangle, like that you actually have the innovation, you have the technology, you have the consumer side, but you also are able to change that culture for the adaptation. So without further ado, Vic, the floor is completely yours.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for those kind words, Wim. I really, really appreciate that. And actually, I just wanted to say a quick welcome to all of you. So I'm going to do my favorite welcome karakia, which is Keina tapu, Keina mana, Keina ihi, Keina wehi. Nā iho monga e waina nui i a koutou. No piki mai, no kaki mai, haere mai, koutou katua, which essentially means to all of the senior lineage among you, to all of the authorities among you, to all of your essential life forces, to all of your awesomeness and the sacred mountains that bind us all together. Welcome, 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 each and every one of you. And can I say a huge thank you? I am standing between you and chocolate, so it is great to see you here this afternoon for this. And it's a really, really important topic. So what I was going to cover today is to talk about, just to share some quick thoughts on the future of AgriTech and how we see that shaping up at Callaghan Innovation. And we do a lot of work with you, our innovators, our entrepreneurs, our partners. So, you know, I'm hoping much of this will resonate with you. Then I'm going to talk about some of the global problems that need to be solved and some of the real opportunities for our New Zealand businesses to step into. Then we'll chat on some things that I think you need to take into consideration to take charge of the situation that we face over the next decade or so. And then finally, how Callaghan Innovation can support you in that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of doing. I'm not going to give a presentation. I'm just going to try and keep this really engaging. What I would love you to do to keep it engaging is to put some questions in the Q&A part. So while I'm just kicking off on the first bit, if you want to pile in with some questions, that will also give me a feel for what you're looking for. This is a very broad topic that we can cover. There's a lot of areas we can go. So pop some questions in, and I'll kind of be talking, answering those along the way, just so we can keep this a little bit interactive as well for a Zoom webinar where I'm speaking at you. So let's just kick off by talking about AgriTech and what is it, and how can it change the future of agriculture, and how can it change our country? So as we know, AgriTech is incredibly globally competitive, and New Zealand is right up there in regards to our ability to compete in that. It's a highly connected ecosystem. It produces some ingenious and some indigenous solutions and products and services. They are value-adding businesses. It's providing meaningful, high-value jobs for the people in our country. And it is solving New Zealand and the world's productivity and sustainability problems. And so I think, you know, that really sums up for me the importance of this industry in New Zealand and how innovation can actually help this industry move forward. It's solving massive problems like how the heck do we feed the growing world population of 10 billion people by 2050? We need to provide a lot more food. We cannot use the resources at the pace that we have been using them. And of course, we've got some pretty serious climate and environmental challenges to solve along the way. And so what we'll be talking about today is how can technology help that? And how can the changes that technology brings make you think differently about the other things that you do in your organizations to get you on the front foot for this? Of course, New Zealand AgriTech is not only supporting the future of New Zealand agriculture, but it is benefiting the world. And I feel super proud of so many of our companies who are in this space, who are taking on these global challenges for the world. Callaghan Innovation obviously works with many of you, also our industry partners, other government agencies such as NZTE, our Crown Research Institutes, MPI, MB, and of course our industry partner AgriTech New Zealand. And that's all as part of the AgriTech industry transformation plan. And if you haven't seen that, then just Google it. And there's quite a bit of stuff in there, and you'll go to, even on our site, there's quite a lot of information about that. The aim of that plan is to turbocharge commercialisation in the sector and to grow capable, internationally ready New Zealand AgriTech businesses who are solving global problems in agriculture, which of course will benefit us, but ultimately will benefit the world. It's about how we create really powerful partnerships to provide knowledge a range of specialised services, advice and access to networks, both in New Zealand and around the world, that will benefit our AgriTech innovators and those that are innovating for our farmers and our growers. And AgriTech creates world-leading solutions that will work for people and the environment as well. So I just want to cover some of the challenges that we are facing. And I think, we are facing some significant headwinds, and that's before we even start talking about agriculture. So of course we've got climate, which is, not just specific to agriculture, but in a whole, pretty much every industry we're operating in. We have challenges with the way those industries are operating in terms of a sustainable planet. We have technology acceleration, just a plethora of technologies coming through, which are driving all sorts of things like automation and massive opportunities for our entrepreneurs. We in New Zealand and other countries around the world have an aging population. In the next 15 to 20 years, our 65 plus population will double and our working population will increase by only 10%. So I think you can probably see straight away some of the challenges that we are going to have in that. We have massive geopolitical changes happening globally in regards to the power shifts for economies with China, India, really, they're going to be the number 1 and 2 economies in the world. And then you've got the likes of Southeast Asia, Mexico, Russia, who knows where they're at now, but they're all gaining in the next couple of decades. And so kind of out goes the likes of the UK, Germany, Japan, a lot of partners that we're used to trading with. And so there's some big changes there coming for us. Of course, we've got the changing of social values, and that is something that hits at the heart of the agriculture industry. And that's particularly been around, should we be continuing to consume animals at the rate that we have been? So there's a lot of change happening in that space globally. And that's before we get to COVID, a war that's going on, and then of course the flow-on effects like inflation. So we are well and truly in the VUCA world, and our models that we've used over the past 20, 30 years just will not serve us moving forward. And so that's what we've got to be thinking about. So if we just talk more specifically about AgriTech. So at Callaghan Innovation, we've got over 350 AgriTech companies. Known to us, they're our R&D innovators, and they're made up of lots of small businesses and really only a few large ones such as LIC, Gallagher's, Blue Lab, for example, are some of the more well-known ones in terms of leading the AgriTech innovation space. It's a sector that for the most part has been solving predominantly New Zealand grower and farmer problems, and then facing the challenge of how do you commercialize those globally, which is quite challenging. And this leads to companies with a solution trying to find an international market. So to build capable New Zealand AgriTech businesses that are globally focused, the opportunity Callaghan Innovation has been exploring is how we connect global problems with our solutions much earlier in the journey. So as we are developing and testing, designing these solutions, that we're thinking about the global challenges a lot earlier on. To grow many small AgriTech businesses into future growth businesses, we've got to build capable entrepreneurs. So we support a lot of capability programs from startup, and that's with the likes of the Sprout Accelerator and Palmerston North, and of course WNT Ventures. We've got our capital education programs, and we've got access to R&D funding and student funding. But I'll talk a bit more about that later. We also play a strong role in connecting the ecosystem, and in AgriTech, this is done through a range of small events that connect researchers, tech innovators and growers together. And of course, we are hugely supportive of many of the people we work with across the ecosystem doing events like this. We are creating clusters of activity that connect the ecosystems, and that's around wine, tech, viticulture tech, hort tech, aquaculture tech, clean tech, and farm and pasture tech. And so these clusters are aiming to connect those with problems to those who have the solutions and create that greater collaboration, because what we do know about this VUCA world is you cannot go it alone, that we do need to go it partnering, and we do need to be in platform models to do that. Of course, Maori and iwi are significant owners of land in Aotearoa, and also sea and forests, and have the ability to be early adopters of technology and the creators of new technology as well. And so how we partner with them on this journey and adopt some of their principles, I think, is really important. And I think, you know, the way that our Māori views its relationship between humans and everything around it, because it's a very relational culture, I think that there's a lot that we can learn from that. And so I guess the last point on the opportunities is how you put climate at the heart of your strategy. And too often I see businesses seeing it as an add-on, something that they need to do on top of what they are already doing. And so the questions I have is, how do you embed sustainability deeply in your strategy? It's synergistic with everything that you do every day. And by doing this, that we are thinking about, hopefully, how we're leaving our planet in a better place for our grandchildren or our mokopuna, rather than continuing to deplete its resources just because there are so many of us that need to live on this planet, and by very nature causing significant disruption, poverty, food shortages, and of course we're going to be displacing around 180 million people across the planet in the coming 15, 20 years, including 1.8 million in the Pacific due to climate change. So some pretty big impacts of how we have been acting. So that's kind of a summary of what we see as AgriTech, and some of the global opportunities and some of the trends around that. I think Julio's got a question in here around in regards to producing more food, in terms of that is critical, and yes, it is important. But rethinking the supply chain is even more important. And I think you've got a really great point on that. And I think there's a number of aspects to that. And that is in regards to how do we increase the amount of food by not growing more? And so that's having a really good look at wastage through our food production process and then our food consumption process. And we know that, you know, around the world, it's estimated we waste, depending on the country, 30 to 50% of our meat, our fish, and our plants, vegetables, and fruits. And so I think, you know, one of the aspects that we can get stuck into in the supply chain is how do we actually reduce that wastage, because we could feed a lot more people if we just simply looked at that. Another one is then how do you start to get integrity in the supply chain, because of course consumer preferences are changing significantly, and we are wanting to know where our food is grown, we are wanting to know that it is ethical and the like. So I think there's huge opportunities for technology to play a role, and obviously we're seeing it in New Zealand and around the world with the likes of blockchain to be able to provide authenticity, integrity in the food, in terms of from where it was grown right into the plate. So Julia, I think there are a lot of opportunities in the supply chain as well in regards to how we think about that. So I think that's a really important question, and I know some businesses are looking at that, and I think as a world we're going to need to look a lot more at that. Let's go into some of the global opportunities. I think it will start to answer some of the questions that may be coming through. Charles, thank you for your perspective around climate. It's fourth behind biodiversity loss, nitrogen, phosphorus, synthetic chemicals in the environment. And I think that is a really important perspective. And yes, I was using climate sustainably, interchangeably, and more broadly than that. And I think Wim is going to answer this question a bit later as well. And for me, it comes down to, you know, humans, we have a history of not treating our environment and the biodiversity of our environment respectfully enough, and doing quite a lot of damage, well, significant damage to that over time. So I equally think a lot of the technology that's coming through in regards to being able to kind of measure our environments, data, sensors and the likes, cameras and all of that, to be able to understand in real time not just the impacts of how we are doing that, but how we are slowing it down so we actually know that we are making a difference. So Charles, I think you've got a really good point there. And there's lots of technology and innovation that can really help us understand the level of contamination that we're putting out there, the level of impact that we're having. And we need to start measuring that, and we need to start to understand and collect the data to show that we are significantly changing the trajectory on that. So we just talk about some of the global problems that we see out there. So of course, water supply and use is a hugely significant one. And we just have to grow more with less. And so California, Australia is probably the closest to us in terms of looking at areas where they've got, had some of the driest and wettest year on records. And is really starting to spur calls for water conservation. How do we use water differently? How do we collect water differently? And how do we get water around our countries differently? In order for us to, do what we need to do in terms of feeding the world, but of course also for the other things that we need to use water for. We've got quite a lot of New Zealand companies working in this space. So we've got Wild Eye that's based out of Fresno in California, and it's got a smart R&D team in Auckland. And we've got AgriTech, which was developed out of Lincoln AgriTech in North America, which is where they found a strong local partner who will be using AgriTech software to design new irrigation systems into orchards. And they've got a recent exclusive licensing agreement with Autonomous Pivot of some ground penetrating radar technologies. That's one of the technologies developed out of Lincoln AgriTech. So a great example of R&D into commercialization. And then we've got CropX, which is an Israeli company with a strong New Zealand-based R&D team through the acquisition of Regen, and they're delivering a simple, cost-effective water management software and IoT solution that will automate water management for growers. So there's a lot happening in that space, and that's a critical area for the world to be focusing on moving forward, and innovation and technology can play a very strong role there. The next one is around inadequate labour supply, and we already struggle in regards to labour supply in New Zealand. It's been exacerbated by COVID, by immigration, and of course moving forward with an ageing population. I'm not sure that they want to get out and get on the land and work it. As they hit retirement age, and our working population is shrinking, as I said before. So farmers and growers around the world are facing a real shortage. And luckily there is technology that is coming our way to do that. And we've got lots of examples of that in New Zealand in terms of bringing in robotics to help us on our land and in the various aspects of what we're producing. So you've got the likes of Flip Farm, Green Tech Robotics, Halter Robotics Plus that are doing everything from managing herds and kind of automating that, so there's not as much human intervention in terms of how you move your herds around, through to automatic picking of fruit in our orchards, etc. So that whole automation space is absolutely critical to help us address some of the labour shortages, not just in New Zealand, but that will be around globally. Another opportunity that we see is crop protection, and so how plant productivity and health using natural solutions that are kind to the environment. And there are a lot of changing expectations from the public in this space, and so we do need to step into that in many industries across New Zealand. And again, we've got some good examples of companies doing that. So Biolumic, the head office is now in the US, but the R&D team is in Palmerston North, and they're working with Bayer Innovation on crop solutions along with growers to increase productivity through their light recipe technology from seed and seedling stage. And we've got a range of other companies in this space that are replacing chemical crop protection solutions like AgriSea, BioStart, BioTelliger, and Equilibrium Biological. So I think there was a question in there around the relationship between ag tech and biological and ecological solutions to the challenges in agriculture. And I think, again, Charles, that is absolutely spot on. And we see those different areas that need to come together. And whether it's the likes of what I've just talked about in terms of more environmentally land friendly ways of growing our food, or through to using sensors, cameras, etc., to be monitoring our ecology and understanding better our impacts and how we are improving, i.e. less impacting the ecological systems that we are operating in. So IoT, sensors, cameras, and that information being collected in real time, added to information that is out there in terms of creating massive databases to build machine learning off. That's the sorts of things, the opportunities that we have moving forward. The next one is clean tech. And so this really is around kaitiakitanga, which is how we care for our people, our place and our planet. And, you know, in terms of my journey of understanding Te Ao Māori, you know, that's one of the biggest kind of distinctions that I see in terms of the way that they think and the way that the Western culture thinks is, you know, we can be at times very transactional with the environment around us. And by the environment, I mean everything around us. And I think Te Ao Māori is far more relational in terms of wanting to understand the impacts that humans have and the relationship that humans have with every aspect of the environment around it, whether it's the land, the whenua, the sea, the people, the forests, etc. So clean tech and environment tech is at the core of nearly all agriculture solutions. And, you know, if there isn't an environmental benefit that's helping to inform the farmer grower on how the land, people, planet is being managed, there needs to be. And you know, many farmers are leaning into this already and wanting technology to help them inform this. And so what we're seeing in terms of changes are growers want exposure to relevant information. So not just, you know, every piece of data, but relevant data. And this is one of the main challenges for wine growers considering AgriTech. So Callaghan and Braggato Research Institute have joint workshop finding and are working on more collaboration discussions with growers and farmers nationally and internationally to support greater adoption of tech so that farmers can get that real-time insightful or real-time information that builds insights around their land and their use. Consumer demands are changing whether you like it or not, and we don't set those. Unfortunately, we're a tiny country at the bottom of the world, and you know, there's a huge portion of the world's population that is, you know, kind of 25 and under. And that is the population that is setting a lot of the social changes around food, environment, and how products and services are being judged. And I think, you know, we just got to lean into that instead of denying that. If we want to compete on the global stage, we've got to lean into that. Increased VC investment globally in AgriTech, it's huge, it's phenomenal, as many of you would know. And of course, that capital needs to come here as well, and it is coming here. So, you know, we are slowly ramping up our investment in AgriTech, and that is really exciting to see. Companies that are getting their offerings offshore faster, we're definitely seeing that. We're seeing investment and scaling faster, like Biolumic, Hector and Halter are great examples of that. They've still got a strong R&D base and group and talent, but they're really connected internationally. And we know from the work that the Productivity Commission has done, when you've got that connectivity internationally, your innovation rates and your products and services, your marketing and your business model are a lot higher than if you're just a New Zealand company alone. The power of positive partnering, and Figured's a great example here. So their farm accounting software, partnering with Xero, Robotics Plus investment, and Robotics Plus and partnering with Yamaha. So there's some great partnerships that are forming, and I just reinforce that we can't do this on our own, and that we do have to use partnership and collaboration and platforms to help us build off. And then, of course, we've got the shortage in jobs in engineering, and that's in every type, data science, artificial intelligence, mechatronics, people with technical ability, as well as understanding agriculture. And you know, as we bring more and more technology in, as we have more and more complexity to solve, we also need a lot more soft skills in terms of how we take our people through all of these changes that are going to happen. So there's a lot happening on that front. So kind of, I mean, and sometimes you can look at this and just kind of go, oh, you know, like, what's the point? You know, there is so much to consider here. and there is, so much changing underneath us and changing quite fast. And I guess, my view is that you can get on top of this and you can turn a lot of this into opportunities. And many of our companies are absolutely doing that. And you do that by, you eat an elephant by taking one bite at a time. And so the sorts of things that we would encourage you to be really thinking about is kind of what I wanted to talk through next. And that is that technology disruption is here to stay. There's a plethora of technology coming, and the change technology is bringing is accelerating. And so it's our responsibility as leaders to work out how we integrate humans and machines, how we upskill our people, how we think about our organizations as interactions between hardware, software, and the human interface. And there's so many companies operating in this space, particularly the robotics companies. And so I think, really thinking about as leaders, that's part of the mindset that we need to bring forward into the next decade. And it's not really something that we've had to do as much in this level of volume in the past couple of decades. There's been a lot of technology change, but not to this level. And so research and development is one way that you can do this. And essentially research and development is just the application of technology into your offerings. So your products and services, your existing ones, helping you come up with new ones, how technology can change your business model, like applying blockchain to your supply chain in terms of authenticity, or whether it's about your business model through, partnering and doing things differently. So in New Zealand, we don't do enough R&D. We are behind the world, so we're a little slower at looking at all of this new technology and working out how it can improve and change the trajectory of our businesses. In New Zealand, we're also really, really good at taking technology and applying it to efficiency, i.e. the bottom line. We're not as strong as technology to the revenue line and how we use it for growth. So really thinking about that is important. And I'll come to some ways that we can support you in that. The next one is, are you actively planning your workforce? Do you have a workforce strategy? So technology is bringing around a lot of automation. You'll need a lot of upskilling and a lot of reskilling. And of course, we've got an aging population as well. The search for talent is tough and it's getting tougher. So really ensuring that you've got a strategy around your workforce and how that needs to change over the next decade or so. It is really important, and it's not always something that we do. And we know that 84% of employers will upskill their workforce versus 21% in 2011. So there's a lot of investment that needs to go into upskilling your workforce. And there's some great tips that we can just steal globally from companies that are ahead of us on this path. New leadership competencies are needed. So you look at this level of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, automation, new leadership skills are needed. And so how are you thinking about that is actually really, really important. And are you investing in your leaders to prepare them for the skills that they need to navigate through the complexity? And that's everything from, the impacts of automation, the 50 gazillion things they need to be thinking about, how you partner across the ecosystem. So how you find and select partners and grow that kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem partnership, how you step into the changing social values. There's just so much that your leaders need to be doing, and you need to be thinking about how you're upskilling them. And then, of course, I've talked about the R&D and the applications of that. The next one is really looking at your ecosystem. And, there's lots of great companies emerging in New Zealand. And of course, there's a lot offshore that can help you with these opportunities that are created. And so coming up with ecosystem mapping and ecosystem strategies to know who your partners in crime will be that will get you through the next decade is really important. We've got a platform called Scale Up New Zealand that can help you with that, and I'll come back to that. The next one is how, for those of you who are a bit larger or are growing fast and have got a capital injection and have a board around you, my last question is, How are you thinking about them? And boards are critical. They can either really support this type of work, or they can detract from it. So what is your strategy for, if you need to modernize your board, what's your strategy for getting people onto your board that can bring in this level of thinking of what your businesses are going to look like in the coming decade, or what they're going to scale to globally, and therefore they will support you with that. So that's a whole lot of things that I actually think that we can do that. So just finally, some couple of points, and then we'll go to the questions. And there's a lot of support available from Callaghan Innovation. We've got the AgriTech Support Explorer. So if you just Google that, that's where you can get access to government funding and support. And it's a place where it will just help you understand where you can get support for what type of funding. So that's aiming to simplify that for you. Of course, we've got a number of ways that we can support your research and development through the R&D tax incentive, which we work with Inland Revenue on, or of course our project grants and our student grants. So there's a number of places there that we can help you. We've got our innovation skills programs, which is about building capability in your organization. And that's things like, how do you manage your IP? What's your capital raising strategies, thinking about that? And if you're slightly bigger, how do you bring digital lean through your organization to get all of those efficiencies that we know technology can deliver? We also have a Global Signals newsletter by Melissa Clark Reynolds, and many of you will know her. And she's a leading foresight practitioner and a futurist and a strategist. And so she provides some thought-provoking insights on the future of food, agriculture, and agri-tech. So that's another thing that we're working with others to support. We have a couple of hundred engineers and scientists ourselves. And we know that talent is short around New Zealand. So they work in the biotechnology space and the kind of big data, internet sensoring space, in the robotics space, computer vision, looking at materials and looking at manufacturing. And so they are there to support businesses either through getting your product into market, getting it from a pilot, kind of into market, or if you're scaling and wanting to build kind of efficiencies in your supply chains, etc., they can also support. And it's all around the application of technology, again, into your products, services, and operations. So, we can help in that way as well. And we've got the Early Adopter Network, and that's about bringing experts together from across the AgriTech sector. So we work with NZTE on that as well. And then we also have programs around scaling for global growth that we work with NZTE on that. Many of you will know about Farm 2050, and which we support that. And so that's a trialing platform to identify promising technologies and nutrient management. So we kind of talked a little bit about that. So there's a lot there. And finally, we have Scale Up New Zealand. And that is a platform where we've been collecting a lot of the innovators and technology across all sorts of areas, and then making it visible for you to have a look at. And so that's people who are innovating in the agri-tech sector, people who are investing in it, what incubators and accelerators are playing in it, and the like. So there's a lot there that we can do to support you. I'm hoping that you can hear me still. My earpod just fell out. So that's kind of it. And so we've got lots of questions here. So I'm just going to go through them. So Curtis seems that climate change is overly concerned. Excessive use of fertilizer and pesticides is creating pests. Absolutely. So I 100% agree with you in regards to, I personally consider our use of fertilizers, pesticides as part of the sustainability challenge, which I wrap into kind of climate and sustainability together, and of course that impacts soil and our ability to grow. So I completely agree with you that we should be, and we are in many instances, looking at that as part of the challenge that we are facing. Troy, let's go to yours next. We've got there's a lot of localized research in the 90s, consistently all sorts of research dispersed into a 60% social rate of return. Do we need to research reforms, bringing understanding okay. And okay, so I think for me, I'm not sure if you're aware Te Aroparangi and the review that's been kicked off in regards to our research, science and innovation sector. And I think I might be answering your question, but forgive me if I haven't quite got to the heart of it. That is looking at how we organise that system and what that system focuses on in terms of its missions, how it's organised, and then how we commercialise ideas out of that through. And I think that's a huge opportunity for this question that you've put up here. Some of my personal thoughts are, actually no, I'm going to take that back. Some of our organisational thoughts that we put into the submission on that paper is exactly that we think that there needs to be much better partnership between the research institutes and industry much earlier on. So a lot of the research that is happening has a path to commercialisation, has a lot more visibility early on. And I think, you know, Israel, Ireland are really good examples of where industry is involved in the research supply chain, if you like, a lot early on. And it means that a lot more commercialisation is happening. There's another question in here around pathways for non-tech impact focused ventures to scale. And I think for me, these two questions are related because I'm not sure that we're using our research in all of the possible ways that we can. So research flowing into decision making, into policy making, yes, into commercial ventures, into social enterprises, and also into government in terms of how government takes all of its research that it's funding and then improves its products and services that it is supporting industry and our citizens with. So I think there are a number of ways that we can use research better. You're spot on. Zebulon Laffy, I'm so sorry, I've really pronounced that wrong. You're spot on that this is not just about technology, that there is also a whole range of incredible research out there that we can be commercialising more broadly, not just into economic entities, but into our policy decisions, into our not-for-profit sector, and into our government sector as well. So we're pretty passionate that there's a lot more investment that's needed in commercialisation from our science sector to really take advantage of the work that's happening in there. There's a question here from Murray. To what degree is resource policy regulation uncertainty in New Zealand holding back development and uptake tech on farms? I mean, I think, you know, you probably know the answer to that better because you're in it. My observation would be that governments globally are not strong at RegTech or regulation of new technologies. And I think, you know, there's a number of examples in New Zealand where we're not strong at that either. That is quickly rising to the top of innovation prioritization globally, which is we need to be regulating this technology from a number of different aspects so that businesses have kind of clear indicators of how to use it. So I think it's a really, really pertinent question that you bring up, and all I would say is that industry collectively, you know, continuing to lobby government around the regulatory certainty that they must provide to you to underpin some of this investment. And then of course there's another reason why we need to look at it, and that is because if we don't regulate that, we're also not looking at some of the ethical implications of some of the technology coming through. And then of course, particularly in some areas through machine learning and particularly machine learning is looking at some of the unconscious bias that exists in that. And then blockchain, of course, is another one where, you know, we want to start to ensure that that technology is used from an ethical perspective, and New Zealand's a great place to be testing out that technology and regulation, because at heart we are a very ethical country. So regulation of the land, or sorry, that question meant in terms of regulation of the land, yeah, probably out of my scope in terms of being across that. I have some personal views, but I may not share that. Your point is valid, and apologies, I misread your question. There's a question from Curtis around a pathway for better is better for agricultural innovation and engineering? Would you give some suggestions on when we wanted to focus on future development and improvements? Okay, I'm not quite getting that question. Curtis, can you just have another crack at that? I'm really sorry, I'm not quite understanding that. Or Wim, if you want to jump on in and help me understand that, you feel free to do that. Curtis also goes on to say most of the technology is not widely used. And is that vital to educate and promote agri-knowledge? So my view is yes, I completely agree with you that much technology is not widely used. And there is a difference between New Zealand and globally on that. That the data in New Zealand says that we have not yet caught on to the opportunities that technology brings. And we're still focused on things like cloud adoption, e-commerce, some of those things, whereas parts of the rest of the world and actually in some developing countries, they're moving super fast on blockchain, automation, a lot of these other technologies. And so for me, it comes down to knowledge. It comes down to being connected globally, because if you're connected globally, you do see how fast the rest of the world is moving. It comes down to our low R&D, that we're just not, as a country, used to bringing all of this new technology in and working out where it impacts. And it comes down to our mindsets. So for me, every new technology that comes on stream is an opportunity for us to add value into our organizations. And that value can be top line revenue, it can be efficiencies and productivity, it can be better relationships with customers, etc. And so we can tend to view technology disconnected from the value that it can bring to our businesses. So that's why we're so passionate about R&D. R&D is one way that you can play around and really understand how technology can be more widely used in your organization to extract top line and bottom line value, so revenue and cost. Troy's answered a question. Cool, thank you. To Aotearoa future pathways. Okay, so I think Troy's answered that. Yes, Troy, you are spot on. It's not strictly true. It is looking at the entire research sector, and it will take quite a few years. And the direction that all of us have been given is that they'll be looking at the funding priorities, how they set the funding priorities, as one of the first cabs off the rank, which I think is a really, really exciting thing to do. Right. Charles, let's have a go. My previous question about biological and ecological solutions is not about solutions that can be commercialized, but techniques such as agroecology and biological control, fundamentally uncommercializable as knowledge. Okay, I guess Charles, my response to this question is, I think we use commercialization too narrowly. And Callaghan Innovation commercialization is really focused on how do we take these ideas, whether they're from science or elsewhere, knowledge created elsewhere, and how do you create them into businesses, whether that's an economic outcome or a social enterprise outcome, which balances economic and purpose. And what I would love to see New Zealand think about is how do we think about commercialization more broadly? So that the opportunity, I think that's in your question, is that knowledge that sits there around agroecology and biological control. How do we get that out there amongst a far wider range of people? And whether that's into industry, whether that's into our government sector, whether that's through partnering with iwi, or whether that's into our decision making or development of our policy. So I'm very curious around the opportunities for New Zealand to think about commercialization more broader, that it is knowledge, and that knowledge transfer can happen in a number of ways and significantly improve not just the creation of high value productivity jobs, but as I said, how we make decisions, how we create policy, and how we spread knowledge, for people who are involved in those areas. So I think that was a big part of our submission on Te Araparangi, is how do we increase the commercialisation skills, not just through Callaghan Innovation, but in other parts of government, and to be able to do that. Yes, absolutely, and you're spot on, Troy, in regards to reflecting the health of rural communities, etc. So it's not really currently in the mandate of Callaghan Innovation to do that. As I said, our mandate is more strongly around commercialisation for kind of economic and social outcomes via social enterprises for the social side of it. But I think there is a massive opportunity. We have unbelievable knowledge being created in our different sectors, science and practitioners, and how we use that knowledge in multiple ways is really important. Curtis, the previous question is, what pathways should we get in when we are wanted to improve and develop agriculture practices, for example, from engineering factors, machines and farm design? Okay, cool. I'm hoping that I've answered some of that on the way through. Julio, thinking that this has already happened with dairy and grains, how far is New Zealand in replacing labour with automation and horticulture? I mean, I think we have come a long way in terms of the development of startups and ideas to be able to work in the horticultural sector. But I do think we've got a long way to go, and you just you need to look at kiwi fruit picking, and we're still bringing in people to do that. So I think we have a long way to go, but we have made a good start, and so then it comes down to, how do we grow more of those companies? How do we get capital to more of those companies in order to be able to do that R&D, to then be able to scale that? So I think there's quite a way to go, but I do think that we have, we are on the right path, and we've made some good steps there.
Vic,
yes.
Wim here. Would it be true to say that new orchards coming in, they will be designed for automation either right now or in the future, and that the challenge is with the current orchards that are there, they're still very much reliant on manual labor?
Yeah, and I think that's true with any kind of greenfields versus brownfields, if you like. Development is that it's way easier to start something up new and ensure that you're embedding and you're designing that for the next kind of 10, 20, 30 years. It's much harder to take, existing and significant sunk capital investment and transfer it to the level of modernisation that we are looking at with all of the changes coming through. So I think you're spot on, Wim, in regards to that's why not just in horticulture, but right across many industries, we are struggling so much, because we've got that transfer of huge investment over the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 years for companies. And that's not going to hold them in good stead moving forward. So the challenge is, where do you start? And capital and shortage of technology skills, etc., etc. Wim, you feel free to jump in and just kind of direct me if there's some other areas where I'm not quite interpreting this quite right. And then we've got Colin Tudgeon, so we shall reap, notes, enlightened agriculture on the one hand is rooted in physical realities, landscape, climate, living creatures, humanity. Is that realistic? And if so, how do we find the balance between industrial? Oh my God, that's such a huge question, Jeff. And I think, I think that is at the heart of what we are facing through the next few decades. We know that we haven't got the balance right between industrialization and biology and the environment, in terms of how we have been treating it to ensure that we can continue to grow at the pace we have been, and do that in a way that our planet is going to thrive as well as the humans that are on it. And then all the species around us are going to thrive as well. And so I think there's a number of things that help there. And I think leaning into that discussion, I think that can be hard for some people because, you know, we've grown up in a certain way for so long. So it's quite mind-bendy to get your head around a different model. I fundamentally think what you're asking is at the heart of many of our challenges. I think technology can play a role because technology, from a lot of the solutions that I'm seeing technology being created into, it solves not just productivity, which plays to capitalism, industrialism. It also plays to climate in terms of being able to monitor, measure, and understand our impacts and treat those in a better way. It plays to inclusion as well. So for me, technology that is kind of mainstreaming now has a far greater opportunity to help us rebalance. It comes to the way that we think, and Indigenous people, whether it's to our Māori or Aboriginals or American Indians, they do just tend to, some of their ways of thinking are a bit more in that space of balance. And so how open-minded we might be to embracing some of that and kind of getting past some of the obstacles that may be in the way of that. I think that's a big one. And then I think, for me personally, just thinking about, my children who are 17 and 22, are already, thinking about what the world looks like for them. They're going to live to on average 100, way longer than we are. And so they're already thinking about, what the climate's going to look like. They're reading these climate reports. They're working out what they need to do to minimize their footprint, wanting to work in the space, et cetera, et cetera. So I keep putting them in my the front of it in terms of what's the world going to look like in 20 years for them, and in 60, 80 years for their children and grandchildren, and how do we make sure that what we've been able to enjoy can continue to be enjoyed. So I do think there's a whole range of things that play in there, and I am not the expert in that space. There will be people on this call who are more qualified than me. These are just some of the things that I think we need to be bringing in, not just in our thinking as leaders, but also into governance. So shall I leave it there, or shall I answer this last? Absolutely yes. So yes, international students play a role, and that's for a whole range of reasons. In regards to, we do not have enough talent and students in New Zealand doing this. We've still got a mismatch between what's coming out of universities and what the sector needs. Of course, we do have the very real, and I'm going to call it, threat of the brain drain post-COVID, and predicted to see 50 to 100,000 people leave. So I think you have to be looking at international students. 50%, actually I think it's 65% of STEM graduates globally are coming from India and China. You have to be looking at a workforce strategy that includes international talent, and bringing them into the country, or if possible, remote working, with all the things that we've learned from COVID. So I really hope that's that was useful. I know it's a bit strange just talking like this for a while. I hope it wasn't too boring, and I hope you get to eat lots of chocolate over the next few days and celebrate what you want to celebrate with the Easter break coming up.
Vic, thank you so much for keeping us on the edges of our seats, and absolutely fantastic. I think what I take away from this is that transition is required. We need to go from where we are now and where we are yesterday to something where, like you mentioned, your children and my children and all our children will be proud of the work that we are actually doing. And what I really is sticking in my brain is that we need to do this collaboratively, and we need to make sure that we take society with us on this journey to make sure that this transition is a successful one. Thank you so much for your time. We are almost at the end of this Vibe session. And I just wanted to share with you what's coming up in the very near future. On the 21st of April, we're actually going to use design thinking to look at how we can multiply the impact of agricultural science. And so again, it's an innovation series. So we have 3 amazing speakers. And so please join us for that. It is a virtual event. So like we said, we hope to go into the face-to-face again shortly. The other one coming up is the 17th of May is digital agriculture. And we have 2 amazing speakers from AgResearch, and that will be a face-to-face event here in the Blink workshop in Lincoln. The cool thing about this ecosystem that we're all in, it is really small. And so we are partnering with the FFA Challenge that is initiated by Christchurch and Z, supported by KiwiNet and the University of Canterbury in the form of the Centre of Entrepreneurship. And there are absolutely amazing people coming up with solutions for our sector, and from really young students coming up with brilliant ideas to people that are now in the retirement age, or well, so society says, but they're picking up their ideas that they had 15 years ago and actually putting it in the challenge, and they're being helped and mentored. So watch this space, watch our newsletters. We will be reporting on those. The last thing that I want to put your attention to is BOMA and Itipu, the Agri Summit. Absolutely amazing place if you just want to be wowed with what is happening in the agricultural and food area. Absolutely highly recommended. That brings me to the end of this Vibe session. Thank you so much for being with us. Vic, thank you so much for speaking with us, and we'll hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much.